Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. I am delighted to be bringing to you today all things Challenger. I have my books that were purchased for me. One of them was in corporate years ago. And I embody Challenger. I love the Challenger. So I was delighted to speak with Jen Allen, Chief Evangelist of the Challenger. And she's just such a wealth of knowledge, and she embodies the Challenger. She really did demonstrate her teaching ability. And, that's so important. One of the 3 T's that we talked about. But really what we talked about was, how can we challenge, and the word challenge elicits a little bit of a bravado, you're coming in them, you're in their face, and it's not that. It's just, how can we teach them something? How can we teach them a tailored message while taking control? And she shares a lot of ways we can do that. One of the big ones was storytelling, and it's an underutilized but very valuable. I don't like the word soft skill because it's a soft skill, but it produces hard results. So we talked about storytelling. How do we prepare for a meeting, and really looking at, how can we highlight or bring to their attention something they're completely unaware of to really stand out and be that trusted advisor, show them we understand their business. And it takes a bit of work, but we can do it. How do we really share stories that that highlight the problem or the risk of inactivity? That's huge. The cost of inactivity, because, most deals do end in status quo. So how can we present the risks of what will happen if they don't take action? And more importantly, how can we tee it up, shine a light on things so the awareness comes from their side going, wow, you know what, we really need to do something about it. And that's where the art and science of sales comes into, that creating that awareness so that the accountability and the ownership is from the prospect side. So great lessons here. I encourage you to definitely listen, take some notes. If you know anybody who you feel would benefit from this, highly recommend sharing it with them. As always, we encourage you to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you have any topics or guest ideas, please feel free to reach out to us at info@k2perform.com. And thanks, as always, for listening, and we'll see you next time. So, talking to most sales professionals and a lot of leaders that are trying to support their team, I still find the number one problem that we're up against in terms of a competitor is unfortunately not a competitor. It still remains the status quo. So, delighted to be speaking with Jen Allen, the Chief Evangelist of Challenger Sale and the host of Winning the Challenger Sale, to really unpack all things status quo, moving past it, mindset, tactics as we can get in front of it versus reactive, because you've kind of lost your window of opportunity there. So, Jen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and so excited to jam with you about one of my very, very favorite topics. So thank you.
Yes, my pleasure. Well, I want to first of all say, I think this was released in 2011, and I was still in corporate at the time. So, just to show my loyalty here, I've got the both. They're still sticky notes. It's funny to see, years ago what I highlighted and if I would still highlight the same things. But kudos to our sales leader, Simon Hood, at the time that brought this in. And the irony is, as we were reading the various personas, Challenger, they said, this is a lot like Karen Kelly. So they were calling me Challenger, unbeknownst to the characteristics. I just always took that approach of really taking control, not in an aggressive, but just leading and advancing, ensuring that, I was educating at the same time. But a lot of times it's like the blind leading the blind. And that's just a perfect recipe to go, I'm out of here because it's too slow. You're going left. I want to go right. And so I just think taking control, teaching a tailored message while taking control, it really is timeless. So maybe before we begin, Jen, just to give some context, can you give a very high level overview of what Challenger is for those who are, living under a rock or haven't heard of it.
There's plenty of people living under rocks, so happy to. So basically, you're absolutely right. We did the initial research back in 08, 09. So anyone who was selling during that time will remember what a absolutely horrific motion that was, trying to sell in the middle of an economic crisis. And essentially, what happened is at the time, we were a business that would go out and survey sales leaders, marketing leaders at big companies and say, what's the number one challenge you're trying to solve for this year? And then we'll use our, group of 300 sales leaders to figure out, is anybody doing something on that topic that we can teach back? So it was kind of a subscription best practice model. And what happened in 08, 09 was really funny is almost every single sales leader and marketing leader came back and said, the world around us is completely changing. We, if we're being honest, have no clue what is driving the loyalty equation for our customers today. And as a result, we have no idea to what plays to tell our sellers to run. Like we are truly, as you mentioned before, like we are the blind leading the blind, and we're the sales leader, and our sellers are looking back at us. We don't know what to tell them. So, can you help us understand what actually is behind the loyalty equation for B2B customers today? And then what should sellers be doing in response to that? And so it set off what has been the last 15 years of studying this annually to explore what makes a customer loyal and what does a seller need to do in response to that. And the very Cliff Notes version, which you don't need to read the book to get it, is essentially when we studied customers, what we learned through our analysis of them is your price, your brand, your quality of your products and services, they all matter. You cannot get away with having all of that stuff be bad. But when you look at where companies tend to invest when times are tough, we double down on those. Let's make our price more competitive. Let's be, a better brand. Let's roll out more products and services. But what customers showed us is like if I'm looking at GE or Siemens, I'm not going to my CFO and saying like we got to go with GE because they're a better brand. It just doesn't, it's not the way that buyers buy anymore. And so what really did have an impact was actually the quality of the sales experience that your sellers deliver. Like it's crazy. Over 53% of what makes a customer loyal is the extent to which you show up and teach them about risks, costs, flaws to their own business instead of showing up and throwing up all about ours. And so that was really fascinating, but you can't go out to uh, 200 sales leaders and say, the answer is just go teach your customers, because what would happen is every seller would interpret that differently. So that got us on the second part of the study, which was now let's look at sellers and just study what they're doing in practice. And what I love about your story, Karen, is we get a lot of flack sometimes where people are like, Challenger isn't new. I've been doing this for 10 years. And we're like, yeah, we didn't invent it. We just went out and we studied what are sellers doing in practice and then observed certain patterns. So it was folks like you who'd already figured it out. Like something along the way caused you to realize, I've got to change the way I sell. You started selling like that, but a lot of your peers probably didn't have that same revelation. And so when we did this analysis, what we found is there were just certain skills and behaviors that clustered together, and we just named them. And that's how we got to the 5 profiles, which are basically the 5 different mindsets we as sellers might bring to a customer conversation.
Yeah, I love that. And I still, so much stuff there. And that 53%, I actually teach that a lot because I think when it comes down to mindset, and especially in a commoditized market, a lot of people start knowing the chips are stacked against them, say, you know what? There's regulations, there's this, they're gonna go with who they're gonna go with. And I'm like, more than half the reason why they choose is because of you. You personally, you create the experience. So I just think the minute you think that, to take that defeatist attitude, So that's the first point. The second point is just like you said, then you had to move into step 2. How do you create this framework? But I think what some companies are lacking is the awareness into, okay, this isn't new, but have we isolated what we're doing well? Like, and a lot of times people are like, we're crushing it. And I'm like, that's great. What are you doing? What's contributing to this growth? I don't know, but we're crushing it. Well, how do you repeat it? How do you double down on it when you can't pinpoint it? And so, how do you also drive consistency amongst your team that say, okay, at this stage, create a playbook? When we do this, man, that the uptick is huge. Or conversely, when we do this, we see a delay, we see the response time go down. But I think when we aren't aware of what we are doing, we can't repeat it or we can't avoid it.
And what do we leave people to do instead? Just figure it out, mess it up, make
Yeah.
mistakes, lose deals. And then what do? We get frustrated with them. We put them on performance plans, and we never actually taught them, here's what you're running into, right? And so I love the way you talk about that. it is, I think, the duty of any sales leader, whether it's Challenger, whether it's something else, you've got to have some guidance for your sales team around what is the sales experience you want your customers to receive from you? What is it you want your customers to
Mhm.
say? Do you want them to say, man, they did a great job talking about their widgets? Or do you want them to say, boy, if it came down to it, I probably would have paid for that sales experience. Like that's how insightful, that's how
Mhm.
how helpful it was. To your point, by not setting that bar, what you do is you allow sellers independently to come up with their own ideas around what they think the sales experience should be, which if we didn't know any better would be fine, right? But we do. We know what customers are asking
Mhm.
for. So by failing to do that, it's in my opinion, I know it's a bit harsh, but I think it's a big failure on the part of a leader to not give sellers the insight as to what customers are looking for out of the time they spend with you.
Yeah, I agree because everyone, perceives themselves in one way, but could be perceived by their customers in another. So it's always, this is one thing I go back to is value. It's such an overused word, but it's like, is it perceived value or is it actual value? Like you think it's a great idea, but have you actually asked your customer, is this still valuable? We actually have updated our process and we don't do that anymore. So when you run this report, we don't use it. Therefore, it's not valuable. So I just think that that perception and that's where the sales leader does have to come in and really give their team the framework and show them what excellent looks like. But what I love is it's backed by data. It's proven.
Yeah. And that's why I get really excited talking to folks like yourself who've said like, "Hey, I was pursuing this and this just like crystallized for me that the things I were doing maybe just subconsciously it allowed me to be more thoughtful and intentional about doing them regularly." But to me, so the five profiles are and we can talk more about it if you want, but it's the lone wolf, it's the relationship builder, it's the hard worker, the problem solver and the challenger. I actually grew up learning how to be a relationship builder. So when I read Challenger, I was like, this couldn't be farther from the truth on who I am. I believed that customers buy for me because I was likable, I was accessible, I would go the extra mile for them. And so for me to read that was really, really disarming because I'm like, I'm not comfortable with tension. I'm not comfortable like showing someone that they may have a flawed strategy. And how I interpreted initially was, Jen, you've got to go from being this really nice person who's a yes and a head nodder to now going out and being like, and this is why you're wrong, and this is why you're wrong. And I was like, I could never do that. That was a failure on my part to truly understand what it meant to challenge. I'm not challenging an individual. Like we will always lose that battle because they're the customer and I'm the vendor and it's just human nature. We don't want to be wrong, right? So when someone tells you like you've got the wrong microphone for this show, what are you going to do? You're going to sit there and defend all the reasons why it's right. And that's so like that's a common misconception about Challenger. It's not going out and challenging and attacking the person. It is about exposing a belief, an assumption, something that they've held, which by the way, probably worked at some point, but something around them changed. And it's our job to be that conduit of insight to say, here's the thing it's changed and here's how that's impacted this strategy that used to work so well and leading with that kind of empathy behind it.
Hmm. Oh, that's so much gold there, Jen. And I just think it's a bit of a mindset when you think you're challenging someone. And that word challenge it does have a little bit of a your fists are up a bit. But think about, the art and science. And the art piece is how can I invite you? I don't want to give you the answer because then I'm a salesperson coming at you with commission breath. But how can I share an insight, tell a story that invites you? I tee it up to go, huh, I actually never thought about it that way. Like I haven't considered that point of view. And that's what I actually just talked about this week is the difference between an insight and an outside is we need to teach them something that they are unaware of. So if their response is, yeah, great, we're working on that, you haven't fulfilled that first T of teaching them something. So how can we teach them something that their awareness goes up and the aha comes from them because when it comes from them not us there's a sense of accountability and ownership and then they want to put some action behind it going oh, I'm so happy this is my idea, look at me, let's run with this now.
Yes, and this is why I love talking to true challengers like yourself because that is such a subtle nuance that it's so easy to miss. What you said is so spot on. Like our goal is to get them to come to that realization. Nobody likes a seller telling them you need to do something. And so what was fascinating to me as I started learning more about it is I was like, gosh, it's so much more about intellectual curiosity. It's about really great discovery. It's about smart questions. It's about empathy. None of those things were things I would have associated with the word challenger. But when you
Mhm.
you could have the right answer, you could have the right solution, you could have the right problem, and you could have the wrong delivery, right? And it's why I think sales is such an exciting career because I'm of the belief like you can never be a master in it. You can never be an expert in it. And there's constantly things that you learn and our buyers keep changing and all that. But what you just described right there, I think is one of the most compelling and fun lessons to learn is selling is it's really far less about having the right answer and far more about how we get them to realize the right answer.
Totally. And I think it's letting go of ego. I think it's detaching from the outcome. And as a parent and a coach, sometimes I just want to say, just pick it up. Put the pen down and open the door with your right hand. And it kills me not to, but I'm like, what do you think we can do for my kids? But also, when you think about sales leaders coaching their team and why they're not driving results and why they're not adopting a coaching culture is because you didn't hire me to give me the answer. How can you empower me? How can you ask me? How can you lean into your curiosity? It's going to empower me. So next time I'm in this situation, I fall back onto that dopamine hit of feeling good and go, I did it before. Like, what do I need to channel here? And so I just think they're doing a disservice, but it's so easy and it's quick to give that solution. So, like you said, it's a finesse and it's an art. And you got to cut the ego off and say, this is servant leadership. It's not about me. If I can invite you to come at it from the lens I want, and it might take 2 or 3 rounds, but they get that, I did it. And you just see like this childlike wonderment in them. And you're like, yes, I didn't throw in my, I didn't give them the answer too quickly. And it's patience. But God, even for me, the feeling I get when they come to that moment, I'm like, we did it.
Yes. And it is the curse of competence, right? The longer you do a sales job, the more you know things that your customer doesn't. And it's so easy to your point to let ego take over and come with that posture of look how much I know. But I think when I really started to get sales, and I forget who told me this advice, was to remember that like we are all just human beings and we overcomplicate things in sales all the time. So if you think about an interaction with a friend or a parent or something, to your point, that dopamine rush, when you figure something out, you remember that. When someone is
Mhm.
telling you, you've got it wrong, you've got to do it differently, we're just wired to start putting up our defenses and saying all the reasons
Mhm.
that they are wrong. And what I failed to realize at times earlier in my career is it's no different in sales. Like we're just human beings. We make stupid decisions. We do things like that get us into trouble all the time, and it's no exception with buyers. And so the more we deeply understand how we as humans behave, I think the better we become as sellers because we don't make these stupid mistakes thinking, "Oh, it's different because they're a buyer and I have to say or do things a little bit differently."
Yeah, it's so true. Even when we're doing role playing, people get this DJ voice, this news anchor voice, and I'm like, you just something just happened there. You dropped an octave, and I don't know what's going on, but let's just be conversational. Let's be like we're at a coffee shop right now. And I feel that that's what happens. They have to become this person. And, maybe in my earlier days, I probably did the same. But now, especially when I coach, I'm like, just be real. And I'll see glimpses of them come out. I'm like, right there, hang on to that. Double that. That's you. You just came out there. Otherwise, you're a talking suit. And it's just like, how are we going to connect with people and just build trust with them when we can't let go of this persona?
I mean, I relate to that so much. So the organization I worked with, where we spun off from, was a company called Corporate Executive Board or CEB, and it was this big joke that everybody had the same CEB voice, and everything ended in upspeak, and it was like so creepy. Now thinking back about it, and that's one of the things I struggled with a lot because I would look at the top performer and I'd be like, okay, this is one of those hustle culture people, and they don't sleep, and all they do is work and is that what it's going to take for me to be successful? And I think that was the thing about Challenger. I mean, my job now is being the evangelist. Like I'm evangelizing Challenger to other sellers who may not believe they want to do it, but it's because it allowed me to understand how can I take Challenger and make it my own instead of trying to model myself after someone who I just candidly wasn't like. I shared nothing in common with. And so I think a big part of it, and I share this, I loved your advice on this. I share the same thing to new sellers in their career is like, You'll sit in product training, you'll learn all the buzzwords, you'll learn all these things that no executive ever would say, ever would come out of their mouth. And you think when you use it, it's going to give you credibility. It does the exact opposite. It makes you sound naive, like these are new and interesting things when your buyer's looking at you saying, like, we would never talk in our company about it that way. And so I think truly
Mhm.
embracing, if you have a dry sense of humor, use it. If you are super
Mhm.
intellectual, use it. Like eliminate this idea that there's this, personality trait that great sellers have. It's just not true.
I always say, you do you, or, to find self be true. And I'll give you the tactics, I'll give you the outcomes we're looking at, and I'll give you some of the types of questions. But if someone is got their hand up my back like a puppet and they're saying, say this, that is not who I am. And I'm going to sound like a robot and I'm going to have zero connection. So I think it's like, again, it's all about the art and science. How can you, and you think about if 53% of the reason they're buying and the loyalties from the person, allow that person to have their authentic self come through. Use your language. If you don't like this language, choose a word that's going to elicit. So, reverse engineer. We are trying to elicit a sense of urgency. What word, what story is going to do that? We're trying to elicit here, I don't know, speed, or whatever, some emotion, empathy. What can you do? But invite them. Otherwise, it's going to be like, oh wait, now what am I supposed to be? And it's so choppy, and you're disconnecting, not connecting.
Yes, and you think about what is this thing we are all trying to do as sellers? We're trying to differentiate, right? So just logically,
Yeah.
it makes no sense to sound and talk like everybody else. You're just feeding into commoditization. It truly is where your
Hmm.
superpower as a seller is. And I love the way you articulated that. You don't want to be the walking, talking puppet. You want to bring your own
Hmm.
unique spin. You want to tell your own stories. That is something nobody else can replicate. And there are few and far things in between in sales where we actually have that ability, I think.
Hmm. And so, what would you say, Jen, to the newer folks in sales that, perhaps don't want to center themselves and they would rather take the conformity path and they're not ready to have the visibility and share their point of view? What kind of advice would you say to them that maybe want to have the voice of the choir and not the soloist?
Yes. So, first thing I would say is I hope if you don't want to embrace this, you have a truly differentiated product and none of your competitors are ever even close and your price is really, really outstanding because maybe you don't need to do that. But most of us don't have that luxury. So, one thing I would say, and I give this advice a lot, I love spending time with people that are newer to sales, is study your customers. Don't study necessarily how they use you, study them with you and your category completely removed. So I'll give you an example. One of the customers we worked with was a company that was selling self cleaning ice machines. It's super sexy. Um, they sell those to restaurant owners, right? Now, think about if you're a seller and you're going in and you're talking about a self cleaning ice machine and it's the middle of COVID. You're going in there saying it's gonna save you time, Bob doesn't have to clean it anymore, it's gonna make your ice cleaner, and what is that restaurant owner thinking? They're sitting there saying, like, "I couldn't care less about this. I'm trying to keep my doors open, I'm trying to keep my staff employed, I'm worried about another COVID shutdown," and you're having a conversation that has no meaning or substance to your customer. And so what I love is in this story, they went back to the drawing board and said, like, look, we dumped a ton of money into building this product. We cannot keep using this message because our customers just do not care and we need to sell this thing. And so they went back and said, let's study what a restaurant owner actually does care about. Take our category, take our product, take our solution off the table. And they looked at things like, how do I keep, my staff from turning over and quitting? How do I make sure that our restaurant is clean? How do I make sure we don't have to be shut down for a voluntary reason like a foodborne illness? Like, how do I make sure my equipment gets the lifetime value that I need out of it? So, all of these things separating from their category. And this is the advice I give sellers: take the stakeholder you sell to and draw out that circle. What are the things that get them fired? What are the things that get them promoted? And these have to be measurable things, up, down, movement, right? And then think about where are the connections between the value of the solution you offer and those objectives. And that's where the magic is, right? So for Frankie, this company, what they realized is like ice, when you have this dude in the back cleaning the ice machine, his hands are filthy, like disgusting. And so even though he's cleaning the ice machine, what's happening is he's introducing like E. coli and salmonella, and there's EPA studies to prove it. But when people think about a foodborne illness, they never think about ice, right? Restaurant owners just don't connect the two. And so what they were able to show is, look, when I know you've got Bob in the back, I know you think status quo is good enough because Bob's checking the boxes every day and he's doing it 11 to 5 and 11 again. But the reality is, every time he does it within 30 seconds, here's what's now in that ice. Now imagine what happens if one of your customers gets E. coli from your restaurant. What happens to all those people you're trying to keep employed? What happens to the investment you've made in this business and all of the savings you've dumped into it, right? Because your ice quality was bad. And so what's fascinating to me is when you look at a customer that way, when you study the customer through that lens, what you do is you take the effort off of the customer to connect the dots between why your solution adds value, to go back to the word you used before, and you are actually educating them on the cost of inaction, what happens when they don't have it. And that's where you can get so fascinating to your customers. That's where you can truly add value to your customers, when you're teaching them about their business operations and risks and things like that. So I think study your customers in that way. Take your category, take your product off the table.
hmm Well, that for me just shows your problem centric versus product centric, and what a typical challenger approach going in there and looking at it from a problem standpoint and also from the customer's lens. Because we do this thing and it's basically problem, impact, solution matrix, and you're dotted down the line, but at the same time, we have to connect the dots for them. They don't. But the way you go in there and share and expose those things in an educational way, not you're disgusting, you're going to get fired for cleaning your freezer with dirty hands, but in a teaching way. Were you aware? You're bringing, like, for me, if someone came to me and said, Karen, were you aware of this? And I wasn't. My God, thank you for bringing that to my attention, because if I continue to go down that path, do you know what that would do from a cost standpoint, and just zoom out as to the layers of it? But then they're coming to you, you've reversed the tables, and they're like, do you have the solution? Again, that's what we talked about, that teeing it up. And if you
Yes.
can turn the tables by challenging them up front, they in turn will come to you and say, Jen, what is it you sell? Do you have a self cleaning ice maker? Oh, well, matter of fact, we do.
Right. And this is the problem. Like, this company and many companies, so I don't fault this company. This is almost every organization, including ones I've worked for, does this. We get so excited about our new product because we know it's like, man, this is unique. It's differentiated. We want to go tell everybody about it. And like, let's talk about the value. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you money. And customers are like, everybody says that. Everything, every vendor on this earth is saving me time or money. It doesn't have any real meaning. Like, the narrative, when you just switch the narrative, what it allows you to do is create a very clear picture of how much have you invested in this restaurant? How many sales, how many employees rely on their income from this restaurant? Now I'm sizing the actual cost. Now I'm assigning value, true value,
Mhm,
to what happens if I do nothing. And you're so right. It is not to go in and say you're a moron for cleaning your ice machine this way. Is to go in and lead with empathy and say, since forever, this has been the way that restaurants clean their ice machine, right? And I think actually you guys are ahead of the game because Bob has every check mark checked. Many companies I go and I see, like, Bob forgot to do it all day Tuesday. So you're already ahead of the curve. But here's what's so frustrating about it is, even when Bob is on 100% compliance, this ugly, nasty thing is happening. And so I just like the way so much that you talk about it. You're not going in and saying like, you're wrong for having Bob do this. You're absolutely right. You've been right forever, except this thing we just learned completely changes that. And
mhm,
we're learning it together. I'm not talking
mhm.
at you like you're the last to the table to learn about it.
Yeah. No, I think there's no finger pointing. And I think, like you said, you acknowledge them where they're at and they're doing a good job. But here's an opportunity. Can I share some information? Can I share something? And then, Challenger is just a way to educate your clients. So, I think one thing here is, if you want to highlight the cost of inactivity, really look at things from the other person's perspective. And for half a second, put their hat on. Forget your product and say, what do they do when they show up at work? What do they hope that they achieve every day? What do they hope doesn't happen? How are they measured? How are they influences? What personally do they, just get into their heads, but again, not through your product. Because what I find there is, when you're having these conversations, they feel, wow, she really gets me, because we're a peer to peer, we're talking, there's no selling, and then there's trust and there's disarming, and the guards start coming down, and then it's like real people having a conversation. Can you help us out here?
Yes, and that's what you want, right? That's when we feel more confident going back to what you were talking about before, being our true selves because the biggest
Yeah.
intimidation factor I think when I moved into selling is how I earned that trust and credibility. Once I earned it, it was like, man, this job isn't as hard as I thought it was. Sure, there's still some complications late stage of things that happen, but it was really for me all about how do I get that buyer to look at me like I'm on the same level of them and that I have something of value to offer and I'm not just a vendor slinging something. And so I think that's what you earn by doing things this way. And I'll be honest, like I struggled a lot when I was starting to sell this challenger solution because I would look at any opportunity and say, well, everybody should have challenger, right? Like everybody should improve the performance of their sales teams. And that's so dangerous because it is a solution product centric way of looking at the world. And now the
Mhm.
mindset I take when I'm looking at accounts is why might they not need it? Right? Like, what is the
Mhm.
reason that they may hold true to them that they don't need to invest in developing their sales teams, let alone invest in developing with Challenger? And I'm intentionally seeking out the disagreement instead of telling myself this narrative that everybody needs this. And by doing that, it forces me to really isolate what is a problem, an objective, something that company is trying to achieve that they're failing to get to. And only when I have checked that mark will I spend the time to do the outreach and make the calls and write the emails because I know in my mind, I'm not leaving it up to the buyer to figure that out. And that I think is our greatest responsibility as sellers is that's our job. We're the ones that benefit from it. We should be the ones who take that work on. We shouldn't just be like, here's what I offer. Do you need it? And let our buyers figure it out.
Yeah, and the only sad thing there is, Jen, is I don't know. There's a lot of lazy salespeople out there, unfortunately, and they're pitching. And so, how many of the reps that you and I train or work with really hone their business acumen skill and truly seek to first understand, like, what are you trying to achieve here? And again, go against, play that devil's advocate. Like, why wouldn't you do that? If what would prevent you from not doing this, and how would status quo get in the way? And I just think when you can do that, you're coming at it with angles already. And so if one of them comes up, it's not the first time you've heard it. You're well equipped and it's not overcoming, but you can have a conversation with them.
Yes. And candidly, I believe that a lot of reps can be perceived as lazy because that is what their organizations are teaching them to do. Like I actually put the blame on sales leadership. If you are
Yeah.
allowing and encouraging your sellers to go out there and talk about all the great things you do, you are part of the problem, right? Like your sellers are
Hmm.
going to look up, what is my manager teaching me to do? What is my leader teaching me to do? And if none of what we just talked about is in there, what are they going to do? They're going to do the other stuff because the other stuff's easy. It's easy to talk about us. We do product training. We
Hmm.
have all sorts of collateral about us. Like I don't blame sellers who do it when they are not being asked to do something different, right? And that's where I think, again, it is the greatest responsibility of a sales leader to help their sellers understand yes, maybe volume based, activity based plays worked 5, 10 years ago, but maybe what we sold has changed in complexity. Maybe our buyers have changed, and we need to think differently about the motions we pursue to win them. That's on the sales organization in
Hmm.
my mind.
Yeah, 100%. My thing is model the behavior. And if they're, whatever you're doing, they're going to do, they're following suit downstream. So I think a lot of it is just teaching them in a non-assumptive way to first sell the problem and just to even see if they're, I'm not even sure if I can help you yet. I need to learn a little bit more. And just by having that language, you're already detaching from the outcome because you're going in there going, I don't, it's like asking me to fix a window. Well, I don't know if I have the size of glass. Well, what size is it? A double pane, triple pane? Like it's no different than saying, oh, I can do it for sure. I can do it. We're the best. How do you know
Yes,
that?
that like just that. If sellers just took your advice right there, it would create an even better sales experience. Cause that's what I think buyers can't stand is sellers go at them and say, like, I'm gonna find a way to make any problem you have the problem
Yeah.
that we solve. And I think you earn so much credibility by actually saying, like, okay, that's really interesting. Sounds like this is the priority. Like, here's something I've observed other customers I've worked with doing about that. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know that this is the right time for us to engage with you, but here's a couple people I think would be smart for you to talk to. Like that is someone who will come back to you when they are ready because
Mhm.
you've now delivered advice and perspective that helps them. And I think where sellers
Yeah.
can sometimes get stuck is the short game versus the long game. Like not everybody's going to
Yeah.
be in the market for what we sell right now. It's not our jobs to convince them to be. It is our jobs to plant curiosity and seed doubt that what they're doing is in fact the best thing for them to be doing, but not everybody's going to bite on that. And you mentioned it earlier, detaching from the outcome. One of the most helpful things I think you can do in sales and letting your ego go.
Yeah, and having a good pipeline
Yeah.
helps you helps you to that. You know what, Jen? I teach the 3 T's. I've actually added a 4th T. I've, transparency, just with what you said. So this is the Todd Capone 4th edition, in that, disarming and saying, like, if you're looking for that, like, I'll take control, but this isn't an avenue we play in. And I just want to be upfront so that I'm not wasting your time or my time. Setting expectations. Is this a priority? Is this a deal breaker? If it is, I'd much rather know now than later. Also, controlling a narrative versus my competitors coming and saying, oh, you're looking for, they can't do that. Let me let you know that we can't do it. And maybe it's not a big deal.
Yes, I love T as the transparency. And I actually had the opportunity to listen to Todd present for the first time a couple weeks ago, and man, is he killer. I know he's got another book coming out. I'm excited to read it. But yeah, I think
Eh,
that's like if you separate yourself from the outcome and you don't think every single person you talk to is going to buy what you have to offer, and you just enter into it with a ton of curiosity and some perspective framed by the research you did before you called them, like, I don't know that that's often looked at as like the ingredients to being a top seller, but in my experience and watching sales organizations I've worked with, sometimes it's like that's just the bare minimum a lot of sellers skip over.
hmm Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, I want to shift gears a little bit and focus on the status quo, because we kind of talked about, the number I use is 60% of deals end in status quo. And just a lot of people say, well, what can I do now? And I'm like, it's kind of what you should have done 3 steps before. And so for me, it's like, I don't know if we can unring that bell right now. So a lot of what I teach is, how do you get in front of it? So, perhaps you could share, I don't know, we could talk about 2 or 3 ways of which, individual contributors can do to really not create a sense of urgency, but just prevent status quo from happening. Be intentional.
Yes. Okay. Love this. So, the three things I think that come to mind are one, how you prepare, two, how you deliver your message in the first call, and then three, how you tell both a rational and emotional story, because we all use both sides of our brains to make decisions. So, when it comes to how you prepare, um, what I fell into the trap of doing when I first started selling was I would spend a lot of time looking at the company, looking at the person, all good things. I still do that today. What I would not do is spend time trying to understand, what do I believe that company is trying to achieve up here, not down here at the person. Sorry, we're on a podcast and I'm using my hands, but like up at the escalation of the leadership of the organization, not necessarily the person I'm talking to. And then I'm looking at, what can I observe that tells me how they think they get there. So I'll give you a great example. I was working with an SDR today on this very thing. We were looking at a company in the sales tech space to go after. And I said, what do you think this company needs to do? And he said, improve the performance of his sales team. And I was like, well, you've missed it. You've totally missed it, because that's not urgent. It's not dire. Nobody's lights went off because they didn't improve the performance of their sales team. So we started looking at articles online. And one of the things that we found on their website, took 2 minutes to find, was that they were moving or kind of shifting their growth from US to EMEA. They had just named a new leader. They were talking about hiring 70 sellers. And then in that same article, they talked about the fact that they were shifting to drive more enterprise sales. So that was enough for us to know this is an organization that is currently seeing a bit of a stall in the US market, and they're shifting from selling mid to enterprise. So that gives us an understanding of where we believe they're trying to go. Now, what we seek to do is not to tell them how they're doing it is right or wrong, but just to say, look, when other organizations who make similar moves, here is something we've observed that happens sometime. But I'm curious, I don't work for you. I don't know your business as well as you do. How often are you seeing this happen? So in our instance, it was like sellers take the same motions that worked in the mid market sector and try to apply them in enterprise, and then they get stuck because you can't take a product led
hmm
approach there. But curious, are you even seeing it? Right. And all we're trying to do is to get that person to say, at least took the time to learn about us and what we're trying to achieve. They have an interesting problem that maybe it might be hitting on something I'm seeing, and they're not throwing the answer in my face. They're asking a question, recognizing I have my own observations as a leader of a business, and they're inviting me to have a dialogue on that problem. And what that allows us to do is to then earn the right to talk about the problem, not the solution, which is, I know, where the temptation land where we all want to go. But first, we've got to land on the right problem. If that's like the price of entry, right? So that's step number one is in
Yeah.
our prep, we have to look for what they are trying to achieve. If we can find out how they're trying to get there, great. If not, that's okay. We can take our own knowledge of our customers and mistakes they typically make and ask that question around. For this, it was like, are you seeing that your very best enterprise sellers are having a really easy time, but your average performers are struggling because they're employing the same tactics they used when they were selling to majors? I mean, it's either going to hit or it's not, but it does demonstrate that we've done the prep. So that's step one in my mind.
I love that. And it sounds a little bit, we'll already email with the observe, less assumptive language, grade 6, and a soft call to action. But and think about if you're trying to stop the scroll or just get their attention, like that's completely, and the word buyer centric is so overused, but it's all about the buyer. Like you're just observing that if you're trying to paint everyone and this approach with the same brush, it's not going to work without saying that. But you're for me, I would lean in and go, oh, because there's probably a little bit of uncertainty going. We're entering a new market. We're shifting our approach. We're hiring 70 people. Holy cow! Like, am I doing the right thing? Like, strap on your seatbelts because we're going ahead. So if someone's inviting a little bit of a, hang on a minute, we've seen this before. Can I offer a little bit? Can we have a conversation? Chances are, yeah, you can.
Yes, I'm loving talking to you because I just think you do this so effortlessly. It's like this is the thing that's like you often have to train people to do, but you just flawlessly get it. It's you are inviting someone to talk about their own business, not theirs or not yours.
Yeah.
So that to me is kind of step one. And then step two is what we choose to talk about. And this is another classic pitfall. I think many of us have fallen into it is like we get on the phone, we'll do a little discovery about their problem, and then we just cannot wait to tell them how we have the answer to all of their problems and the ROI of it and the value and all the goodness that comes from it. And I think I always say this to this day, the best thing I've learned from Challenger is this idea that before you ever utter the words ROI, you have to demonstrate the cost of inaction, which is what
Mm,
happens when you do nothing, right? When you do something, that requires change. And I think this is, again, another place when you look at human behavior, we are all wired to be so scared of change. We hate it. We like what's safe. We like what's comfortable, especially when you think about what we've been through in the last 2 years. Like the last thing someone wants to invite is more change on a voluntary basis. So even if we know that what we're doing isn't good, we will stick with good enough in exchange, not in exchange for great, because good enough is safe and it's the devil we know. And so when I
mhm.
realized that, instead of getting a customer who's like, yeah, we're really interested in training our reps on Challenger, old Jen would be like, great, here are all your options and here's how much it costs and like what's your buying time frame and all that. And then that person would then have to go make a business case to their boss, but it would be all upside. And they would realize my boss isn't going to go for this. And so the deal would die. Now, what I've learned is I actually have to resist the temptation when I hear those magic words that there's interest. I have to pause them and I have to say, that's awesome. I'm so excited you want to talk about this. But at some point, you're going to need to present a business case to your boss. And I'm sure he gets business cases, she gets business cases all day long of 15 times ROI, 20 times ROI. We got to sound different if you want any chance of this one landing. So let's go back and look at the problem that the company needs to solve. And how do we size the cost of the problem if we do nothing? Because we've got to win the argument there first. Because then, to your point earlier, we create that reaction of this is a bigger problem than I realize. What can we do about it? Oh, by the way, I've got an idea. And you're leading someone to like want a solution instead of trying to force a solution down their throat. So
Mhm.
cost of inaction has been a huge lesson for me. And it's really sizing not what happens if you do something, but what happens if you do nothing.
Mhm. But what a great example, Jen, of just how you were teaching right there. Because they're jumping to get to they want to get the candy, and you're like, hang on a minute, let's pull back a minute. And I'm just going to quickly show, this is the slide I use all the time. I don't know if you know this gong slide, if you can see it. And it's just about everyone jumps to point B, which is the solution. And our job is to pull it back to A and say, what is the status quo? What is the current state? How can we solve the problem? Because when we jump to B and we're pitching, we are pitching to someone who has not yet acknowledged they have a problem. Therefore, they don't need a solution. They're still in denial. We haven't moved them yet. So stick, as you just mentioned, in that current state, that situation. And as much as you want to go and share all the bells and whistles, pull it back. And even get to the impact. And then you can start teaching and priming your mobilizer to start selling on your behalf internally. But one stat I heard you say in one of your podcasts is 49% of stakeholders who want to buy are not willing to advocate for it. So what does that say? We haven't built the case. And I always say, the pain of staying the same has to be greater than the pain of change. And so how can we elicit that discomfort in the current state by selling the cost of inactivity?
Yes, yes, yes to all of that. And I actually, this was a conversation I remember. I was talking to a CSO a couple years ago. I was just interviewing some customers and said, like, not even necessarily my own customers, just customers of our company, just saying, like, when you actually made the case for Challenger, what did you do? And they were like, I'll tell you what I didn't do. I didn't use your 40-page deck with 1,000 bar charts in it. Like, really helpful for me, but I wasn't going to take that to my CEO. I went in and I asked a powerful question that illuminated the cost of inaction. And I was like, man, that is so crazy to think about what I've been sending to these prospects and how much time I was investing in building it and how absolutely useless it was, right? And so that's why I love the way that you describe like sitting in that A state. And the other great side benefit of this is if your prospect cannot articulate with you the cost of doing nothing, they don't have the numbers to put in your formula, they don't know the answers, it is a pretty good tell that you might be with the wrong person. And everybody's business is different, but for us, like, there's a role that we often get stuck with that is just being asked to do something, and we don't win a lot of those. We win when we talk to the person who is asking them to do it, but it's really
Yeah.
hard to elevate that by just saying, "Oh, you're not the right person." So it's like this is where you can kind of get creative, but when you actually are very thoughtful about cost of inaction and saying, "These are inputs we're going to need to figure out." What I found happens is oftentimes they'll bring them in and they will be the one to
Yeah.
say, "Let me bring in Mary because she has visibility in this and I don't." So you don't have to get into that weird
Hmm.
icky space of trying to go above someone's head, which in my
Yeah.
experience like is often like just not terribly effective and can be hurtful to someone who's involved.
Yeah, no, above the line and below the line is what I'm hearing. And just like you said, asking those questions that Mary can only answer, you're not crushing the other person saying, look, you're the user, I know that. I need to go to your boss. But for me, when I used to coach in corporate, I remember going on calls and instantly I remember working with this one gentleman and he's like, I'm stuck here, I can't get past her. And in 2 minutes I'm like, this is not the person you're dealing, like, you're knocking on the wrong door and she's 3 levels below. And I just thought, how can some people not get that? But I think it's the language they're using, the questions you're asking. It's no different if I'm asking someone a question, they're like, that's out of my, you got to talk to the electrician here, I'm the plumber. Okay, we're all trying to achieve the common goal, but if I'm talking to the wrong person, there's no ego involved. I need to escalate it because I think what it shows is, I'm a strategic partner. I'm trying to help you, but at this level, we're not going to move the needle.
Yes, and again, empathy, right? Like I can empathize with the fact that this project lands on your desk and you're being asked to do something in a really condensed time frame and you're feeling pressure to get it done. Here's the thing. Like this is where this is going to
Yeah.
backfire in the end and I need to save you from doing it because I've seen this play 1,000 times before.
Hmm.
So let me help you because you're going to be in a really tough position. Here's what we need
Hmm.
to go and figure out together, right? And you make someone feel like,
Yeah.
okay, this is someone who's working with me, not against me, not trying to go over me, but they've seen it. And that again, I think it just goes back to empathizing with your buyer and your stakeholder and realizing like a lot of times people are thrown into these projects. They don't want to do it. And it's obvious,
Hmm.
but they're just kind of going through the motions because someone told them they had to do it.
I know, but if you're not leading the way and adopting the 3 T's, like you just said, like nothing's going to happen. Like that deal is going to sit on their desk because there's no emotion in it. They were tasked to do it. And so that's where I always say our role is to help people make a decision. If you don't like this, let's get it done quick and go back to what you do like. But you know what? There's a benefit here, and let me show you. And so often, even for me, I'm trying to buy something now, and they're making it so. I'm like, I actually want to give you my money, but nobody's calling me. No one's telling me. No one's revealing behind the curtains when I do give it to you what happens, and I'm reluctant to move forward. And I'm just like, guys, you got to look at things from the customer standpoint. When there's inactivity, why? Why are they not moving? Their cards are folded. Why?
Yeah. And candidly, like, I don't know, Matt Dixon, who's a co-author of the Challenger Sale, just came out with a new book called The Jolt Effect. And it talks about once you overcome the cost of inaction, now you've got to compel people to actually act, right? Like, how do you get someone
Mhm.
who's sitting there thinking about, like, oh, what if my boss thinks I'm an idiot for raising this? And what if my team thinks I'm stupid? Like, there's all these fears in our buyer's mind, no matter how they present, no matter how long they've been there, they're innately in there, right? And so we have to give,
Mhm.
to your point, the buyer the confidence that a step forward is actually a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. And that leads to the third thing. And you brought up the word emotion, which it was another big lesson for me. Like Challenger is a research-based organization. I was super rational in how I was telling the story to sales leaders. And I would just sit there and say, like, well, there's all this research. Why would a sales leader not take this and want to do it? But the reality is, many CSOs are far more emotionally driven than they are rationally. I'm not talking about PhD. I'm not talking to like a CFO, right? They're like, I could understand that's more of a numbers based. I'm having a numbers conversation with someone who operates on gut and instinct. And so what I learned is, in addition to sizing the cost of inaction in like numbers and things that are rational, the importance of telling a story about the cost of doing nothing. And this was really enlightening for me because I think when I first thought about storytelling, storytelling to me was all, this is what happens if you do something. Here's a story of a case study. Here, we worked with this company, we came in, we saved the day, and look at how amazing it is. We all have those stories, every single vendor. And what I learned is storytelling actually is far more impactful in telling the case, the cost of inaction. So I'll give you an example of one that I had very real objection. It was a deal I was working on last year, big global company, and it was the best performance they'd ever had as a company, like hit their annual goal in October. They brought in a new sales leader, actually moved him up, and he was looking at like 2-3 years out, and he's like, this is not going to last. We're on the good side of demand right now. I know it. I don't think the organization knows it. So I want to do Challenger, but I've got to go convince a bunch of people who think, why on earth would we touch our sales team when we're doing so well? Why would we even waste their time, pull them out of their job, get them out of in front of customers so that we can train them on something they're good at? And so the sentiment with this organization, I won't name names, but basically, like, they were the market leader in their space, exceeding their goals. And when I started working with them, I said to the sales leader, can you give me access to a couple of your sellers? I want to ask them about why they think they lose when they do lose. And sure enough, as expected, every single one of those sellers was like, it's price. We're the premium provider in the category. It's the number one reason we lose. And then I talked to one guy, and he said something totally different. He was like, it's actually because our competitors are now using our advantage, our size, our market position as our disadvantage. And I was like, hold on. Like, how would that be a bad thing? You're the best in your space, widely recognized. And he goes, yeah, but we're the biggest. And so when a customer buys from us and they need to write a change
Mhm.
order, which is very frequent, it takes us about 6 to 8 weeks to process that change order. So our competitors are coming in, they're saying, you're absolutely right. They are the biggest and the best. But we know when that change order happens, and it happens every single time, we can respond to it like this because we're small, we're nimble, and we recognize the cost of downtime kills you when you're waiting on that change order to get done. That company, you're going to sit going back and forth between legal for 6 months while you have equipment that is down. So which partner do you want to work with? So that company was actually, in my mind, kind of using a challenger posture against them. And so what I did is, when I got in front of the CEO, I said, look, you're probably even wondering why I'm here. I know it seems irrational because you're killing it on all these metrics, but let me tell you a story, right? And so I talked to him about, your sellers have this belief system you lose because of price. They are completely unaware that you're losing because of this other reason. And the price thing, it's a symptom because your customers don't appreciate the value you offer because you haven't taught them to. And so now tell me, like, are you still comfortable leading with the same story you've always led with, or maybe is it time for a new narrative? Right? And it was this
Mhm.
moment, and you feel it. Like, I know you felt it, Karen, because you're a natural
Yeah,
challenger. It's like you kind of know, like, I got him. I can't answer that
I
question. I
know.
could, but it's unlikely I will answer that question and say, no, what we're doing is good enough. And that to me is the power of storytelling, is you're allowing someone to see, if you can get their own information about their own company, great. But even if you don't, you can tell that story to 6 other companies where it's the same belief system. And that is a way more human approach to showing someone the cost of inaction than just simply drawing out the numbers. Sorry, that was a long
Yeah,
story.
and no, but as you were telling it, I was living it. I'm like, "Yes, she's going for it. She got it." So, I was right back in that original moment with you. So that was well done. And I would agree with that. A lot of people I think are hanging their hats on a symptom of something that maybe has been carried on for years and years and years. And it's like, how can you, and we used to do this, how can we take their strengths and spin it on their head? We can create a boutique type industry. Our turnaround time, we don't have a lot of red tape. I mean, you can spin it any which way you want, but I think we kind of anchor ourselves to these challenges or these objections that have always been around. It's like, oh, we're just the most expensive. It's like, no, there's other ways around it. And even as you said, they're saying you're too expensive because you never got to value, and they're jumping on
Yes.
price.
Yes.
So
No, it's a totally under leveraged thing, any sales organization. We all have them. We all have classic objections. It's like, what story can we tell to change the narrative?
So let's just briefly chat a little bit more on storytelling because I love it. And I think I'm actually reading or listening to Audible now, Good to Great. And it talks about just persuasion, storytelling, and the different parts of the brain that make the decision, and emotion, the neocortex, that reptilian brain. But yet so many people still sell the logic and the reasoning to the limbic brain. And it's like, actually, no, I got that reversed. Sorry, to the neocortex. And it's just like, they don't like stories sell. The facts just tell. And I think when you want to build emotion, you have to paint a picture where your buyer sees themselves in the story. But what I find is we are making us the hero, and we're grandstanding, and it's like they need to be the hero.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So there's a guy I follow. His name is Bilal Batrawi. And I just think he is like the ultimate challenger. You could ask him about any subject in sales and he'd have a completely counterintuitive perspective on it, which is why I enjoy talking to him so much. And I was talking to him a couple months ago about storytelling. And I was like, what's your take on it? And he said the exact same thing you just did. He said, you listen to sellers tell stories, and it's here's how they came in and saved the day. And then you reflect on who actually has to do the bulk of the work in this story. Who has most of the risk? It is the buyer. The buyer is the one that has to sit there
Hmm.
and, in addition to everything they're doing, write a business case. They have to walk into their boss's office and ask for money when, people are making cost cuts. They have to tell their team, "Hey, I know this process that everybody knows really well. We're going to change that now." And they are the person that is putting all of the risk on the line. So when we story tell, when we make ourselves the hero, meaning things like, and then VP of sales came in and worked with Challenger, and they saw an upside, of whatever because of the work that Challenger did. There's no emotional connection from your new buyer in that
Hmm.
story, because they're
Yeah.
like, okay, well, then Challenger gets the credit. And in fact, sometimes it works against us. It's like, well, I was just hired. I don't want to make it look like I can't do my job. So I had to bring in this
Hmm.
external company. And so we have to be very careful around the number of we, our solution, our company, we are dropping in that story. So some of the best advice I got was actually dictate your story and have it transcribe, and then go back and count the number of I's, we's, our company, and then figure out how do you invert that, right? Like make it about
Hmm.
what the buyer did and how the buyer looked when they solved this massive problem, instead of talking about what we did in support of that.
Hmm.
So I completely agree
Yeah.
with you. I think it's a really nuanced thing.
I think when I do storytelling and when I am preparing for a keynote, I always reverse engineer back, and I go the KFD. What do I want them to know, feel, and do? And so I have to be very intentional at different parts of the story, and I practice. So when I see people and they're like, "Oh, it was so effortless," I'm like, "Do you know how many hours went into making that effortless? It is not. It's so the pausing, the the little chuckle, the everything is a good order. Looks like it's effortless. It is hundreds of hours behind it. So from the intonation, the pausing, and pausing for effect, all these things. And it's like practicing for a good joke when your audience is leaning in, and they're like, what is it? What happened? Did he fall off the bar? What happened? That's the way it should be. And I just think I practice so much that when I deliver it, it doesn't sound contrived, but I know when I'm gonna get the leaning in. I know when I'm gonna get the laugh. I know when I'm gonna get, so it's a little bit of a, not stand up, but it has to be, there's a framework behind it that you can't just wing it and tell a story and they're like, I really, what was the point of that? Like, where were you taking me there? Because you didn't take me anywhere.
Yes, it was interesting. I had Nick Capozzi, who is, from Demo Stack. He's their chief storyteller. He was on the podcast last month for the storytelling month, and he shared something with me I thought was so clever, which is he's like, "You can learn a lot from improv." And I've never taken an improv class, but he has a friend that, is like, I think that's kind of his shtick, like, he teaches improv to sellers. And what I didn't know about improv was that improv is actually not about making yourself look good, it's about making your partner look
Yes.
good. Right? And so it's
Yes.
like, man, you think about that and you think about bringing that into your customer conversations. I was like, man, Nick, I should probably take an improv class because there's so much you can learn from that around making your buyer look good, right? If your point of your act, your stick, your story is to make them look good, there's probably a lot you can take away from there. So that was a new idea that I learned recently.
You know what's so funny? I co-facilitated a course, and the woman I did it with, she was also an improv, and she said the exact same thing. She said the goal is to make, and I thought, oh my, because it was a communications course, but I thought that's exactly what we do as sellers. But we want to grandstand, and even it's the same thing as when I put a slide up, and it's my head office and all our people and all the logos I work with, and that's the very first thing we're starting the meeting with. And I'm like, we're very interested in understanding your needs, but I'm just going to show you the 300 awards and our four headquarters, so there's a little bit of an incongruence, but, and I'm like, "No, make it, don't say it's about them and then make it about you."
Oh, my favorite thing is when you've got that slide and you've got all the locations and the customer logos, and then it's like the 3 bullets, and it's like, "We are customer focused." You're like, "Are you? Because
Oh
this whole
god.
page is about you." I feel like I'm talking to, like, my long lost sister in this conversation.
But it's funny when I talk to leaders and I say, so nobody, and I'm very blunt, I'm like, "So they actually don't care about the slide." And you see their mouths drop, they're just, it's like I slap them across the face. They're like, "What?" I'm like, "They don't care." It actually turns them off. They're like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah, you made it about you. That's it."
No, I was gonna say, we talked about in the book, like, the Granger story where they had more locations than anybody else, and so that was their slide, like, "Look, we've got more locations than our competitors." And what they realized is we didn't give them a reason to care. So the whole narrative was about what would make someone value the fact that there's more locations. It's like your CEO's air conditioner breaks down and you need to get the part immediately, like telling that story. Remember the last time that happened and you had to wait 6 weeks for the part to get shipped? It wouldn't happen with us because we've got all
Mhm.
these locations. So it's always that thing of like give them a reason to care before you leave with the thing that makes you unique.
Absolutely. And you know what? One thing, just storytelling. I have young kids, and the minute they're going nuts and I want to control them in, I just start saying, "Once upon a time." I lower my voice and I go, "Once upon a time," and they're both in my lap immediately. And so I just think, how can we do that in real life where we can tell a story? But the one thing I'll notice about stories is, the princess and the prince always get married and live happily ever after. And then sometimes when there's a movie and the princess, goes missing or her hand gets cut off, they're like, "What? I can't handle this." But like, how can we also, without reopening this up, how can we not paint a happily ever after and really to go back and sell that problem, to prevent, to get in front of the cost of inactivity and through storytelling. And I think people are afraid to do that, but it's another way of educating and showing them. I've also worked with customers who didn't take this approach, who didn't adopt this, who waited, and this is what they saw. And leave it with them and let them go, "Holy cow, we got to move here."
Yes. I mean, I think about it as like there's problem stories and there's solution stories. You earn the right to tell a solution story when you've told the problem story and they're leaned in saying, I don't want that to be my ending of my story. And I
Yeah.
love you mentioning like your kids. And it's just another thing. Our brains are wired to tell stories where everybody ends up as a happy ever after. And it does not help disrupt status quo if you're telling a happy
No.
story. Like it's the thing that no buyer wants to think about. It's what happens if I do nothing. I'm convincing myself it's fine, everything will be okay. And
Mhm.
I only change my behavior when I'm presented with a conflicting story to that. So I think it's super, super smart way of thinking about it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, we're at the hour mark here, Jen, and you've shared unbelievable value. Where can people, if they want to follow you, if they want to tune into the podcast, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah. So first of all, just thank you so much for having me on. Like you are a about as natural of a challenger I've ever met, and I really enjoyed hearing your perspective and your stories on this. Like, I truly could talk to you for hours. Anyone who wants to keep the conversation going, I love LinkedIn, so I'm very very into LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me, ask me questions. It's Jennifer Allen at Challenger Inc. And then if you're curious to learn a little bit more about Challenger, I've got a weekly podcast called Winning the Challenger Sale. Anywhere you listen to your podcast, and new episodes come out every Tuesday.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Jen. I really enjoyed our conversation.